The objective is address important questions and issues of our day through a nocturnal marathon of philosophical debates, performances, readings and more taking place this May throughout the US. Coordinated by the Institut Français, Night of Ideas is now presented in more than 100 countries worldwide, including the United States. First introduced to the US in 2015 by the French Embassy, it has become a nationwide phenomenon, drawing thousands of people to events across the country. And before we kick off tonight's event, I would like to extend un très grand merci to our presenting partners. First of all, of course, the New Orleans Jazz Museum, avec Greg Lambouzy and his team here. The Louisiana Endowment for the Humanities, unfortunately they couldn't be here with us tonight. The Alliance Française de la Nouvelle-Orléans with her director Émilie Georget and her team. Merci Émilie. And of course, the Hilliard Art Museum and our moderator, Benjamin Hickey. We hope you enjoy. Have a good evening, and I give the floor to Greg.
Thank you, Natalie. Appreciate it, and it's great to see everybody here. And we're so excited to be working with the Consulate. And the Night of Ideas is I think, a perfect fit for the Jazz Museum. We hope it's a place where people can explore their ideas, think freely, and do all that with some good music. But we also hope that you'll come and visit us for some of the programming that we do regularly. Every Tuesday we have a concert on the balcony, and it's a place you can come and hang out and have fun. But with no further ado, I want to say welcome to everybody here and welcome to the panelists, and I hope you enjoy the evening. Thank you.
I'll do my introduction from here, so it's a little more formal. Thank you all for coming tonight. I'd like to thank the French Consul, Via Albertine, Greg Lambouzy, and of course the New Orleans Jazz Museum for bringing us together this evening for, I think, what will be a really important conversation. Additionally, I'd like to offer thanks to Gabby for her guidance and support as we prepared, so thank you very much. I'm Ben Hickey. I'm the curator of exhibitions at the Hilliard Art Museum on the campus of the University of Louisiana at Lafayette. That's a sentence I kind of have memorized. It's very long. I'm joined this evening by Céline Saint-Ami. In 2021, she was nominated as the Victoire du Jazz Awards in the Rising Star category. She's currently participating in the Via Albertine Jazz Residency in New Orleans in partnership with the Philharmonie de Paris and the New Orleans Jazz Museum. El Kasimu Harris is here this evening as well. There he is there. In 2022, he was named Documentary Photographer of the Year by the Louisiana Endowment for the Humanities. His exhibition, Vanishing Black Bars and Lounges, which is very good, is on view at the Hilliard Art Museum through July 30th. And lastly, sorry, I should have waited. And lastly, the acclaimed painter James Michalopoulos is also participating this evening, and I've lost track of where, here he is. And I have to say that I'm glad to share the stage with the founder of Celebration Distillation and Noro Artist Studios. His exhibition, From the Fat Man to Mahalia James, to Mahalia, James Michalopoulos' music paintings is currently on view here, and I had an opportunity to see it before the presentation. It's excellent and worthy of your time. Our conversation this evening, it's going to be structured to ensure each panel's perspective and expertise is emphasized, but due to time constraints, panelists may not weigh in on each question. It's my hope that this will result in a robust Q&A before Selene concludes with a performance. And so I'd also like to invite up our first panelist, El Kasimu Harris. My introduction failed to mention. He's also a journalist published in the New York Times, A Bitter Southerner, and more. He'll be starting with a brief excerpt from a recently published piece.
Hey, everybody. Feel like I'm about to deliver a sermon. Turn the pages, turn your Bibles. All right. This is sanctified in a deep way, now that I think about it. So a bit of a setup. I'm talking to Kenneth Cheney, who is a longtime patron at a bar, the other place on St. Bernard Avenue. So this is from the 64 parishes, so I'm starting kind of in the middle. And from his vantage point as a regular at the other place, KC saw his neighborhood shift. Property here was cheap, he said, and it's in a strategic location. Folks can walk to the quarter. It had everything white newcomers wanted. So we're talking about St. Bernard Avenue, near Claiborne and Rampart. Casey has watched as 3 of the 6 bars on St. Bernard Avenue have turned white, and now the other place is up for sale. The spaces are the epicenter of black culture in New Orleans, which is the driving force of New Orleans culture. Black bars and lounges are the home to social aid and pleasure clubs, black basking Indians, and community. Historically, they were and remain a place of respite for the rest of the world and the unfair treatment folk faced in areas outside of their neighborhoods. These bars became a safe place where patrons could buy affordable drinks, eat, listen to music, and fraternize. If they're in the Mississippi Delta, we'll call them a juke joint. And in South Africa, it's a shebeen. Regardless of what it's called and where it is, it's their importance to the culture and to the community that is too often overlooked. The black bars and lounges in New Orleans are places where some folk go to watch Saints games or the news. They are places that organize charter bus trips to a away Saints game or just to a few cities over, just because. There are places where you could come as you are after work or step out in your finest threads on a weekend. There are places to see Indian practice in the lead up to Carnival, where they chant, dance, and sing their traditional songs just without their beautiful beaded suits. For a while during the pandemic, the other place was up for sale. For now, that foreboding real estate sign is gone. But across town in Central City, the iconic neon sign at the Sandpiper Lounge has been dimmed for about a year. Social aid and pleasure clubs still stop there on their second lines, but instead of entering, they pause outside. The Purple Rain bar has been sold, yet places like Sportsman's Corner, Bar and Daiquiris, Kermit Ruffin's Mother-in-Law Lounge, First and Last Stop, Bullett's Bar, and the other places are still pouring drinks and serving as repositories, sorry about that, for black brilliance within these communities.
I'm almost done, and then we'll get here. I'm sorry. I'd like to, before we begin, make just a few observations that the last 2 years of the pandemic have made painfully clear that artists understand and reflect our shared humanity more deeply than any group. And with this in mind, I ask the following questions to set the agenda for this evening. What does it mean to be an artist as we move further into the 21st century? Where are we going? This is an unfairly broad question, but I feel it's important to share with you the motivation I have behind the conversation on which we're embarking. Not since World War II have we seen a scale of global turmoil in the economy, as well as a large conflict in Europe. Repeated tragedies have also created a widely felt dissatisfaction with racism, most recently in my hometown of Buffalo. I feel that we continue to reach new boiling points. Perhaps the social upheaval of 1968 globally comes close. And considering this, my aim is not to fixate on how each of you responded to the pandemic in the moment, but how you'd like to focus and what insights you gained with respect to how you'll move forward as an artist and a citizen in the future. I know I ponder this in my role at the museum with an urgency that I've never felt before. And with that, I'd like to invite the panelists up to the stage. We're doing it, okay? It's great. Wonderful. So Selene, in the context of France and the United States, I feel like the pandemic prompted thinking that hastened changes and altered how decisions are made by artists, institutions, and their audiences. Do you feel like that's true, and how is that impacting you? I'm somewhat cynical about the long-term effects of these changes that we're experiencing.
I feel like the changes and the early decisions.
Is the sound working?
Oh, I think it is. Yeah. I feel like all these changes really impacted everyone's lives.
It's still not working right. I'm getting signs from people in the audience they can't hear.
Oh.
Can we make that louder, please?
Allô?
Yeah, that's better. Yeah.
Okay. I need to speak louder. I'm getting shy. We just met. So, can we go through the question again?
Yeah. You know, the pandemic hastened a lot of soul searching and correctives. And I feel like that's put us on a good course. Do you agree, and do you agree that they'll last long term and continue to grow along those lines?
I believe so, because all these changes, impact, like I said, everyone's lives. And as artists working internationally, we weren't able to do our jobs the way we used to. And even the pandemic itself and the disease itself had impacts on musicians' lives. A lot of people passed away. A lot of people got sick. And then what do you do from that? How do you interact again with your bandmates, and how do you go back to touring? The rules kept on changing, at least in Europe. It was very clear, how we could just go to a concert. Should we wear a mask or should we not? It was getting complicated at the point where I felt like the audience didn't want to go out anymore. And so when you reach that point, you just, dissolve all the good work that was done for culture, for communities. But it was a thing. I mean, they had to do that. But now how we move on, how do we recreate those links? That's a good question. I feel like a lot of stuff, a lot of great ideas are coming up and emerging, and that's really reassuring. We feel like we want to move on, but the pandemic is still here. I see some people wearing masks. So we want to move on, but at the same time, it's holding us back. It's holding me back because I'm always freaking out around people. And I get sick myself, and I have like a long COVID version of it with long-lasting side effects. I don't have COVID right now, but and so this also has an impact. How do you go back to touring if you're tired all the time? If you forget, half of a tune? So that's also like something to keep in mind. It's impacting the culture, the audience, the musicians, the artists. It's impacting everyone. Yeah, I don't know if I answered your question.
Absolutely. And James or Kasimu, what do you think in terms of, have institutions supported what you're doing enough in that context? I feel a great deal of support tonight, of course, but in the general sense, where could institutions improve moving forward, since we're kind of having that institutional conversation this evening?
Well, in terms of supporting the arts and artists.
Yeah, artists specifically, where the strengths lie and where do the weaknesses lie?
Well, I would say that they are challenged in the same sense that they're challenged in supporting life in general. Artists are in a certain domain, but what we do in a context that other people do their work in also. Somewhat different, of course, every profession is special, but, institutions are challenged in the sense, for me, that they look at how do they make life possible in an era when a virus can spread easily across a nation and a world. So, like, the questions of social behavior and legislation that suggest or control human behavior are critical and are very important, and have raised issues with regard to democracy and personal liberty. And I think that conversation is very challenging and ongoing. We're right in the middle of it. I was thinking today, some people object to wearing masks, and the city is now suggesting that maybe we're going to have to return to a mask mandate. And, I feel somewhat sympathetic. Nobody likes to wear a mask, but there are certain challenges that are evident. And so somebody suggested they're not going to stop for stoplights any longer either. Because they feel that that's a constraint also. And I'm not alone, I don't think, in this crowd noticing that a lot of people aren't stopping for stoplights. There's an issue with the institutions in building confidence. And one of the issues is that if people feel there isn't sincerity and integrity in the institutions, then it's a free-for-all. And you do what you damn please. So the hell with lights, the hell with masks, the hell with taxes. And it becomes an anarchy. And so institutions, to bring it back, hopefully, to your pointed question, Ben, I think they need to start with looking at the broader question of workable life, and how do we address that question in a democracy, specifically in our case, in this democracy.
Yeah. I don't think institutions have done enough in regards to where it stands with audiences and the communities that they serve. Particularly here in New Orleans, most fine art institutions, most of the black people are employed either as security or janitorial. And there's so much black brilliance, and even beyond blackness, people of color, they have so much. It's like the pool of genius that has gone untapped. And I understand that if you look at the way most institutions are structured, You get money from patrons. A lot of the patrons of the arts in the city are white. A lot of the institutions, they try not to, but they do have the interest in the patrons in mind. Then you go to the boards. Most of the boards are predominantly white. Some of the institutions are trying to change that. And then you go to the curatorial, and as far as then we go down to the artist, access to the museums can be difficult or to those institutions. And you know, I know in the age of being enlightened after George Floyd and folk took to the streets, I did quite a few Zooms, and you know, curators were asking like what could be done. And as a photographer, you know, I said, oh, you know, won't you start? So as a photographer, you have these things called portfolio reviews, where you have this, you know, where you meet curators and you meet other people in your industry, and the access to that is a financial barrier, right? So I know I did the one time here in New Orleans, and living here, it cost $2,000. You know, when you talk about printing your work, getting a box, registration. So when you go to these things, usually it's just all white. A lot of older people who could have this disposable income. So then I'm talking about so most of the institutions, I don't see them doing that as far as like, hey, this is a gateway to get into these programs. And then also for the patrons, for the board members, or for supporters of the museum, it's an opportunity to support artists by buying their work at a very early point in their career. So before George Floyd, most of the institutions, I told you how their company profile was made, and particularly here in New Orleans, it's still the same. So it's like a lot of people got aware, said things, and wanted to support, but I think just 2 years later, it's kind of back to the same old, same old. And some people have good intentions, but it's something that you have to work hard and be unwavering to really institute change and be committed as an institution to truly serve your community. And therefore, it would make the entire institution, the entire city, much better and a welcoming environment, and therefore make your city better. So that's what I think.
Great. I'll come over to your house and we'll do some portfolio reviews. We'll talk about that later. And James, as a follow-up from the very first question, because we're finally moving on to the second one, is generally, you know, do you feel connected to others in our respective national communities as well as globally since the pandemic started?
No. No, I do not. I do not feel that this has increased contact. And I kind of feel overall that there's an increase in polarization, that it's gone an opposite direction. That in general, that's not only true of the artist community, but that's true of the country. That it has become polarized, further polarized by COVID, and fractionated. That in fact, you know, I think largely due to social media, but I don't know. Generally speaking, people have used COVID as a kind of, they've weaponized it. You're wearing a mask, therefore you're on the left, or you're not wearing a mask, therefore you're on the right. That wearing a mask is an impingement on freedom. That not wearing a mask is an expression of freedom. There's been a kind of a symbolization of a lot of this has gone really entirely differently from the actual fact of a simple virus. It's a sickness, you know, that needs to be addressed, and it's become a way of speaking to other issues that divide the country. And I think, and I would say that what I'm present to in the middle of that are questions of democracy. That is essentially questions of control, the direction of the society, and fundamentally or profoundly influenced by the challenging questions with regard to race and class in the United States. These are kind of at the forefront, and they bubble up through the COVID mask. I think that it's been a period where there's been a deepening for a lot of artists. I think there has been a lot of growth. There can be a lot of growth that comes out of difficulty, broadly speaking. But in terms of community and unity, no, I don't think that there's been an increase in that. And I don't know. That's a tough undertaking under any circumstance. There's a lot of different winds blowing out there in the artistic world. So I don't feel more unified.
Do you have a differing opinion?
It's hard to say. I haven't really thought about that. I feel like it takes me more time to get to reach out to people, but I feel like a lot of people, are reaching out and want to rebuild relationships. I'm kind of like a solitary person, so the pandemic, the solitude aspect of the pandemic was not like a problem. So in that sense, I don't know if I'm the best person to answer this question. But I feel like things are happening again as far as building projects and meeting other people. I feel like people are like craving for new things, new experiences, kind of like, it's now or never. Like, we have to do this now because we never know, I've at least that's how I felt in France, in Europe, and in the Caribbean as well, in the French Caribbean. And so in some ways, people are getting back together. I'm not really so much aware about the dynamic here because I just got here since the pandemic after 2 years. So I'm not sure. I feel like, things could have been really different than in Europe, probably. Well, I have to ask people from here, I guess. Like how, because I don't know, you said that you didn't feel like people were reconnecting necessarily. Yeah. Within my generation, I feel like people want to push and create things. But that's just my take.
Yeah, I would say also the solitude was wonderful. But I would say that institutionally, it made for more intimate relationships with artists. There was less going on, it's more communication. Kasimu and I kind of experienced that planning your exhibition. And I would say that institutionally, at the museum and, the French government and the Canadian government have great interest in, and I'm not just towing the company line, have a great interest in reaching out because they have these kind of historical connections to Louisiana. And so I feel like a lot of artists have kind of turned inward and are wanting to try and find their footing. And I feel like organizations are also trying to find their footing, but also have been reaching out, and I think that some really great things will come of it. And I feel your cynicism as well on a broad social level. But that part of the reason why I ask these questions that I'm trying to bring up is because like I worry that I'm in too much of an ivory tower, you know, and so that's really the impetus. I wish all of y'all were on my left.
We could switch seats.
So, and so that was the, you know, that I feel like that's kind of been my experience, and I feel like I've been getting ready to take a great leap for a very long time, and it's, you know, it's frustrating but exciting at the same time. But it's so funny because you mentioned in your previous statement, Cosimo, about, you know, that people are untapped resources, and made me think of the Utah Phillips quote that, be careful if someone calls you one of the country's greatest resources and you're a person. But from that standpoint, you know, I too agree that, you know, I think that programming has improved institutionally within, in terms of the context of how it existed before, but nothing new has happened. And I think mainly because of the pandemic. Like, we were just talking about all these things changing again, you know, and I'm super excited about this idea you just had about just do a portfolio review and don't charge people a whole bunch of money for it. I mean, it's super easy. I'm there for it. But then in the same breath, like, I kind of want one of those masks that they have at the front desk now. You know, so what else could be adjusted in terms of that? You know, do you have specific ideas? If you were a resource to be exploited, which makes me super nervous, you know, like, what could we do for you? Can you elaborate on your previous answer instead of this other question I was going to ask you?
As an artist, you want, you know, I see Mr. Birch in this audience, Mr. Willie Birch, acclaimed artist. Yeah. So I'm gonna use one of his answers. He said, I don't paraphrase, but, you know, it's important to, first of all, we talk about community. I get all of that. It's important to have community because you don't have to go down, you don't have to drive from New Orleans to California without a map. And our mentors, the people who have come before us, that's a roadmap, so we don't have to figure everything out ourselves. And I was talking to him about exhibiting, and he said where he is as his career as a premier established artist, he doesn't want to exhibit anywhere unless they're going to acquire some work, the exhibition is going to tour, and then it's going to come with a publication. And so when you think about what artists want and what they need, like, just starting right there, it seems simple, but it's, you know, okay, and the reason why those things are important is, first of all, they make an acquisition, you're gonna get money. And even if your show is reviewed, if you don't have a publication for it, it's almost like it never happened, like the tree that fell in the woods. And then thirdly, touring allows people outside of your community to see it. And that's when things really go to another level, when you are hitting on all those cylinders. So museums trying to start early with getting budgets together, but then going back to the thing of being in a vacuum by themselves, you know, holler at the Ford Foundation. They always giving out money, seems like, to help diversify these museums. That's just really important. Even in my work as a photographer or a photojournalist or a journalist, there was a website created called Diversify Photo, and it was for people of color. And what happens is, anytime an editor is making an assignment, they're just calling people they know in their Rolodex, or now our iPhones. And if you don't have a diverse pool of other professionals you know, it's going to reflect in your newsroom and then who you assign stories to. And everyone comes to projects in their own way and have a certain knowledge base. But sometimes you see stories where you just really missed the mark. You really got things wrong. And, you know, I think that's lazy on a lot of parts because you didn't do your research or you just so unfamiliar with the community. And so that's some of the things that could be done differently. And really having programming that the community feels welcomed and excited to go to. I saw some museums starting to do things like basically mobile museums going into the community that, you know, going into the community, you know, that's a good thing because you are demystifying it as well as you are meeting people where they are, where they're already comfortable. And that's important. And it's not just for kids, it's for everyone. You hear even affluent people who have this intimidation factor about going into the museum. So, you know, in summation, just acquiring work, diversifying the staffs, and really serving the community.
Well, and so there's not a great transition from that. Don't disagree with you at all. And those things represent all kinds of challenges, you know. Check some of the boxes off, not all of them. But I wanted to return just very briefly to Selene talking about isolation and did that afford you the opportunity to gain any critical insight about your music? Something formal or performative?
Sure, because being isolated, you have so much time to think about stuff and you're not bothered by the outside world. So of course you get all the time you need. And you get to think about new ways, either to create music or to counter the restrictions, but with respecting the rules. 'Cause I'm thinking about this thing we did with Boris, the musician who's going to play with me later. We spent a lot of the time during the lockdown in Martinique, and they had this rule where you couldn't perform, you couldn't gather more than 6 people in one room. And so we thought of doing this 4.5 hour long concert where we would have 6 people coming. The concert was free or donation. 6 people coming and listening to some music for like 15 to 20 minutes, and then the audience would switch. And so that allowed music to stay in the community. People came to hear some music just for a short amount of time. So this isolation and restrictions helped creating new ways. And I think that the Villa Albertine, who's hosting me here in New Orleans, is creating new ways to reach out to French folks who are creative and, you know, bringing them in the States. Because for us, it's not that easy to get into the United States, either to work or to, well, mostly to come and work and stay. It's not that easy. So I feel like we are creating new ways to express ourselves. And yeah, I guess.
Well, and did that impact either of you, Kasimu or James, with respect to, did you gain new insights or just double down on what you're doing in advance of the pandemic?
Of course, you gain insight during the pandemic. You know, it was 2 years, and the first part was really hard for me. I'll speak from my perspective. So, you know, I had a show in Pittsburgh, Fashion Black Bars in Pittsburgh, and on my birthday, February 24th, 2020, the New York Times article dropped, and then I was gonna do like State of the Art 2020. We went to that, we actually went, and then pretty much as soon as we got back, the pandemic happened, and it's like everything stopped, like literally. We all went through the same thing. And then me being in my type of line of work, it's like it got hard because financially it got really tough. And then it's like, what do? You know, for someone to take pictures, or, you know, you usually write about other people, and you're just in the house. And I think maybe March, I got an assignment, like still lives for the New York Times, and they were asking you to document your home as you were, you know, quarantining in place. And that really gave me like, it's like a glimmer of hope. It was uplifting, and I know a lot of people felt like a sadness, even me being an ambivert, so someone who really loves to be around people, but someone who loves to be alone. But it gave me a glimmer of hope, a purpose, a way to still provide for my family. And then after that, it became like a lot of work. A lot of things opened up, and it was almost, in a sense, like and I don't mean this as an offensive way. It was almost like a Katrina, but it was very slow. So it was a very traumatic experience, but one that had no end in sight. And you suffered from it very silently. And how do you try to come back from that? You know, for Katrina, for people who lived here, it was like, okay, we throw out the refrigerator, we clean out the home, start to gut it. But when you are dealing with a traumatic situation that has no antagonist that we could see, how do you fight back from that, and how do you start to rebuild when it's still trying to swallow you up? But the insight I gained was just having a purpose and just continue to tell stories, just continue to reach out to your friends, your family, your loved ones, and that really that helped me during that time. But I know some people are still suffering, so it's always an odd thing.
Am I addressing the effect of the isolation?
Yeah, well, from a creative standpoint, you know, did you gain any creative insight, or was it again just, you know, a holding pattern?
Well, there aren't a lot of holding patterns in my neck of the woods. And I would just like to sort of preface that by saying also, just a little bit earlier, you know, my viewpoint is not cynical, that I don't feel that the connections have increased, but I have a lot of room for possibility. In other words, I'm not like disposed to a negative attitude about it, but I do not believe that it's accurate, that there have been greater connections. In fact, you know, so that being said, you know, working in isolation. So I work in isolation all the time. You know, COVID is something that decreases the social aspect of my life beyond the isolation that's characteristic of my life normally. And I found it, challenging. I find it, you know, upsetting and sometimes inconvenient. But there is an aspect of no choice to it, you know. So I found that I was kind of giving in at some point, that I actually came to view it as an occasion where I could avoid a lot of stuff that I didn't want to go to anyway. And, you know, so it was great. I could turn down invitations freely and avoid a lot of really stupid things. And so it was great that way. And I got to focus on the things that I thought were important and continue to. So, you know, yeah, looking at that as an opportunity to deepen, become more intimate with my work, and to have perhaps more integrity with it. And that's kind of the direction that I've taken it in, was whereas before I would have given more time to distractions, things that related to perhaps more commercial aspects or of the work, or maybe social aspects of my life. Instead, I fell into the actual creation of the work. And so, you know, for me to get lost there is kind of the gift, and a way to think about the heart of what I do is for me to be able to approach truthfully the questions at hand, or the piece of art at hand, and to be unaffected or undistracted by other things. And so pointedly to the question, you know, I was able to just leave a lot of that behind and fall into the work at hand. And that work continues. For me, that never goes away. Honestly, that's like the pivotal heart of the question of art, is like, how far are you able to lose yourself into this work? And the greatest gifts are often found in being lost, not being found. They are actually, you know, they're a matter of a submission or a giving in to the requirements at hand. So, yeah, there's great gifts available in that. They're not all the gifts, but that's certainly a part of what's available and has been for me.
Well, and you know, as a kind of follow-up to that, when I was much younger in my career, I would solicit artists to do a studio visit with me using Facebook Messenger, and they would act, you know, like I had a horn growing from my head, because, you know, you can't look at art with a video, you know, a video communication, like it's just totally improper. And it was always a little bit of a disappointment, but with the pandemic happening, I have started, that's normalized, and I've grown several really intimate relationships with artists with Zoom, you know, and I have regular calls with them. At some point I'll have to show them. But, you know, I feel like that is an interesting way forward for me. And, you know, I'm really interested in ways forward in terms of these, you know, what we've learned and observed. And, you know, I feel like that increasing one's digital lifestyle in a targeted way is really important. And you know, that's one way I've done it to my benefit as a curator. And I feel like, Casimu, I know that you live a robust digital lifestyle. And I feel like it's to your benefit, but it feels like it's a direct extension of your creative process, and something that's really upticked since 2020, as far as I know your work. And so can you walk me through your motivation for being so active on social media in a promotional way, but then also from the standpoint of sharing your work, because it's a big risk for photographers, you know, sharing your work on a platform where anyone can get it. So What's the cost risk thinking in terms of that development for you?
One time my dad said, someone, you could do all these kind of things to protect your car. And he said, but if somebody really wants to steal it, they're going to get it. So, I used to put watermarks on my work, and I was definitely reticent to be on Instagram. I remember my friend Brenton Mock, he was like, it's a photography app where it makes people who are not even photographers look like photographers. And I was like, well, that's just dumb. But now, like you say, I'm on it all the time, on Instagram, straight flexing. So, but it's interesting. Professionally, you for the editorial side, you often get emails from curators who have gone through, not curators, but editors who have gone through your Instagram feed, and they'll use it as a reference for like however they want you to approach it. Like if it's a portrait, they've shown portraits that I've taken, like, hey, take it like this, not too tight, a little loose. So it's interesting in that way, and I do think it's an extension of me. I like stories on Instagram as well. It's a way to communicate with people who are not close to you in proximity, and those who are as well. And I don't often share work in progress there, but sometimes you do like to do that, and it's like a vetting kind of thing to see how it's received, and to see it's like a, what do you call it, like a focus group, to see how it's received and to see how people think about it. And you still, as an artist, stay true to what you believe in, your visual representations that you have, but you still, art is meant to be shared, so you do take that in consideration. So that's how I look at Instagram and the digital things, as well as a way to promote and share what I'm doing, because sometimes you can just, I think it's a way for people to hear from you and also get to know you, and I do really like that aspect of it in a different way, one that I can control.
And, in terms of a digital presence, is that something that either of you have embraced or are ambivalent towards?
I don't necessarily embrace it, as I don't necessarily like it. As a musician, I feel like we kind of have to do it. I don't like that we have to do it. That's my only thing. My only problem with this Instagram, Facebook, social media stuff. If we put out a record and we don't promote it, then it's a problem. So we have to share our stuff. We have to talk about our concerts to bring people in. And I would voluntarily show pictures of the poster of the concert, like 3 days later. It became a problem, so I'm trying to get better at this. Although I met fabulous people, I met fabulous people on social media, and I arrived in New Orleans a year and a half ago, and so I start looking at the people from here, the musicians. I type one name and then it brings me to someone else, and and so on and so on. And I end up now playing with these people, meeting wonderful musicians. So it's a great tool. It's a great tool as long as the tool does not use you, just use the tool. So that frontier is not, it's hard to set in place, I feel like, because anyone now can just reach you. And it's cool because it brings people together, but I feel like, you know, in the urge of answering all the time, and it feels like a duty. So relationship with social media is conflictual. I love it, I hate it, you know.
Well, and you know,
Well, I kind of feel like it's a very important medium right now. Digital media is de plus en plus, more and more replacing actual life as the way that we relate. And I have mixed feelings about that. I think it's kind of an instrumental medium these days. It's critical to relate that way, and there's parts of it that I love. Like I love the show Tiny Desk, where I get to watch artists from all different kinds of music on, but you know, I don't know if there's a comment section below that, but it quickly brings up this thing about that I don't like about social media, and that is that there's a lot of anonymous content commenting that goes on, and that it's, I think, corrosive and like really basically unworkable now, broadly speaking. There's a lot of bile out there, and it pollutes the sharing and the conversation. And so I'll leave that for a moment and just say that it's, for me personally, a way to share my work with people, and I like that. I like to get out further and have greater reach. I think most artists would argue for that because they are, and I am, concerned to share my work. I want to do that the best that I can. Yeah, I like it, but I don't like it as a replacement, frankly. I like the fact that people can see something physically and touch it, and I don't want it to devolve into an electronic sharing any more than I want to live in my living room or my den for the rest of my life, you know. So yeah, I'll use it as a tool, and it's an open question for me. It's like I don't feel I've really embraced it totally, and I'm still looking at how I might use it and how fully I'll get engaged with it. But it does have a certain utility, that's for sure, in terms of sharing it out there. On that simple level, yeah, I find it very useful.
well, to return to the concept of relatability, you know, when we were first met on Zoom like a month ago, you know, I've been wanting to ask you, you know, in terms of that, you know, it's an interesting balancing act between the real and the fake, but then also relatability in terms of the content you're providing people. And so how do you balance that relatability while still pushing your work forward within the work itself, you know?
Well, I don't know, but one thing that came up for me when you were saying that is I think we would have a very different Zoom conversation if there were a few of us on there on the Zoom,
Yeah.
and half of them were just heads with no face, and there was a pseudonym,
Yeah.
right? It opens up that conversation to a lot of base instincts and perhaps inauthenticity, and in fact, even, you know, I mean, like not really humans, bots. But perhaps I'm going a far afield of like what we're talking about. I love the fact that Zoom creates the possibility to be with somebody numerically in a you know, on a computer. Like I feel like I can get a lot out of a personal interaction in a Zoom interaction. So I very much like that. Did I get at the heart of your question?
Yeah, you know, I think you did. Well, and previously before as well, we're talking about the, you know, the primacy of the art object.
Yeah, it's important. I mean, I don't know. At some point, you know, what we're concerned with, even beyond the object, is the effect that it has. You know, like I don't make it to create something that's fetishized, but really more that's something that's shared and is enlivening. So what is the enlivenment? What opening comes from the creation of a piece of work? What does somebody looking at it go like, wow, now I can sing, or now I want to go out and plant a flower, or wow, I really appreciate that group, you know? So for me, all these conveyances have to do with the final effect and the ennoblement or enlargement of human life. Yeah.
Well, I think that bleeds into the next thing. I was very curious to hear from you because, you know, I always think about the object, but you don't have an object per se, but you still have to mediate a relationship with the audience, and it has to do with authenticity. How do you choose to interact with your audience so that that is felt authentically in the same way that we're talking about in terms of a visual sense?
I think what is the closest to interacting with the audience would be to have, I mean, that's my dream thing, to have like a concert talk where it's not really like us on stage and then people, you know, listening, especially in Europe. The audience is really quiet and we can barely see them because it's all these like big halls and it's easy to find like a big concert hall. So we often ended up playing in these big spaces where you hardly see the audience and you don't hear things, so you don't even know if there's anyone, you know. So it's when you have this kind of, you know, interaction, like poor interactions with the audience, I think what's left is to have concert talks where we explain what we do, or if, especially in the music that I do, there's a big cultural element to it. Being a part of the African diaspora, I like to play rhythms. There's drummers playing in my band. They're from different part of the Caribbean, Guadeloupe, Martinique, so we often end up, you know, on stage explaining what are these drums, where do they come from, what do they mean when we play certain rhythms, what is it, why do we play them, why does it feel like that, and people often ask what is improvised and what is rehearsed. So that's usually like the biggest question. And I feel like it should be, you know, in like in a room and we just like exchange, but there's no like, oh, this is us and then you guys ask the questions. I never really, I don't feel comfortable with that. So
we're sort of doing that now.
some people talked. No, but we're asking questions between each other.
Yeah,
so it works. What was I saying? Oh, outreach things, you know, makes it really interesting for everyone. Visiting schools, you know, and try to get like a more community aspect of things rather than just doing a performance and then leaving, and then people who are in front of us, you know, just take a little bit and then move on to the next thing, like kind of tell a story and exchange stories together. And I would hate that music, arts in general is just like Instagram. You just like, you have a fast, you know, experience, you know, and then that's it. You don't take back anything. So, yeah, in my performances, I like to read, talk about, you know, the moon and the eclipse that just happened, actually. And yeah, interact as much as we can with the musicians.
Excellent. Well, and then in terms of interaction, like I feel like I'm kind of getting that sense that there's something to unearth in terms of interaction and how we engage with people. And I get the sense that I'm very much out of practice with it. And thinking about that, you know, like each of you engage people very differently with respect to your work. Like Casimu, specifically, I'm interested in a way like your work's very entertaining, but there's a level of, there's an element of activism in there. You know, we're talking about relatability and authenticity, and I feel like you have that, and you also have there's a sense of accountability within your work. Can you speak to how that element of your practice shapes the way you engage with other people as they view your work and understand that?
Yeah, my work is definitely rooted in activism. I wouldn't call myself an activist, and it's intentionally that way. One, inherently, because of often the subject matters, the things that I embark on. It's you're examining, or you are coming from a point of contention, so the work lends itself that way. But it's also like it's like, I would say, like natural medicine or something like that. It's not like a cough syrup that you're gonna taste and it's really nasty. It's something that hopefully can heal, educate, and something that you enjoy at the same time. Now, the nature of being an artist is everything wouldn't be like that. You know, sometimes you do have something that intentionally makes someone feel uncomfortable. It's just a matter of a rhythm, because we could become compassion deficient if all of your work was like that. For me, and if all of your work was really light and fluffy, perhaps the point you were trying to make wouldn't be heard as well. So I try to do a balance of it, and visually looking at it aesthetically, it may come from one way, and then when you go deeper into it, and things like this do allow me to interact with people and hear how they relate to the work. Oftentimes, just like with anything, you have the ladder of abstraction. It could be one thing that we're talking about, bars on St. Bernard Avenue, but then it scales out to, you know, bars all of downtown. Then it goes to the city. But one thing is, when I've been with different people and talking to different people, is that they're always reminded of something like, oh, well, my uncle's house still looks like that. The furniture hadn't been changed. It's still velvet and red. Not velvet, what is it? Vinyl. Or the bar in Pittsburgh that my grandfather went to when he worked in the steel mill, it's shuttered in that whole community. So just scaling it out, there are themes that, despite your race, your gender identification, anything, these things, much of my work is a universal theme, and if you really look at it, it's things that we all could relate to. And so I think about that in my work a lot. And then I would say not calling myself an activist gives me the flexibility to do whatever I want to do. You know, I like going to small cities and taking photos on Main Street too, you know, and how some of these places hadn't really changed, and I find a beauty in that. So I think about a lot of different things and how it relates to people, but whatever starts inside of me, that's the main focus. And how someone will receive it, I try not to truly consider that in the act of making art.
Now, did I overstate anyone else's claim to activism with that question to Kasimu? Something I didn't perceive in your practices? I apologize if that was the case. No? Okay. Okay. I just had to check, but I was just received a note that we're a little over on time, and I didn't want to miss out on questions and answers. So if anyone in the audience was curious, something that wasn't addressed appropriately or at all, please feel free to.
I have a question. All touched into it. I'm also an artist, and so my question is to the three of you. And I want you to think about it for your own art, not for activism, not for other people, not for any. How did being sheltered in place or not, was there a shift in how you saw yourself and then the answer of creating the art? Was there a shift in each of you in was there a growth? Really a shift of how you created your art while you were sheltered and then afterwards. Does that question make sense?
It does.
Yeah. Do you want to repeat it, Ben?
Sure. She was asking if there's a shift in terms of what it was like during shelter in place versus after.
No, your art, your own personal expression as artists, or anyone, there's a desire to express. And so did you shift in how you express and what you express, either on paint, photography, or in music? Was there a shift that you saw that occurred over those 2 years?
I don't mind answering first, because for me it was very clear and obvious. I got sick as soon as the lockdown started from COVID, and we didn't know what this disease was, so it was unclear, and people kept on saying, it's gonna last, you're gonna get sick for like 15 days, and then that's it, you know. And as far as I'm concerned, the disease never left.
Never left.
And so it's been 2 years of COVID in my life, which feels really long. And the issue, well, I couldn't practice for a couple of months because I was so weak, I couldn't do anything. And so without touching the instrument, I thought that I was gonna lose a lot of my abilities, and my hands would be weak, and my ideas were gone, and that was it, you know. And at the same time, I'm a student of music, so I felt like, you know, I'm already behind. I'm gonna miss out on getting better because I'm practicing, I'm working and studying. But when I got back to the instrument, I felt better. I mean, I felt like I was a better instrumentalist, weirdly, because I haven't been practicing, but my head had been working the whole time. And so going back to the instrument, trying to write some music, the process had to be different because I was so different. I couldn't like just sit and write some music on paper. It had to be like a very spiritual and in the moment kind of creation. And so as I felt like I was trying to heal, the healing was the growth and brought me back to a certain way of creating. And I ended up composing music for an album, and in a very different way that I've ever done. Very unprepared. It felt like very unprepared because I hadn't write any music, and I just brought some musicians into the studio, and but I couldn't really do it differently. And it came out as, you know, we just worked it out. I had all the parts in my head, and I just told them the parts. And so I don't think I would have done that if not for the pandemic. And so in a way, I'm grateful for it, really, but not so grateful. But yeah.
Thank you. No, that's beautiful. Thank you.
No, I'd say no. I did feel a shift. The greatest shift that I felt in my work was probably when it came to like social justice. So maybe around 2015, somewhere around that, I felt a great shift in my work then, as far as approach and being more emboldened to talk about it as it relates to COVID and a shift in my work. There was a period in time where I was extremely afraid of the bars that I had already been documenting that exacerbating their closure or speeding it up. So a shift in that, and another shift would be just to each day work harder to not procrastinate, because I've interviewed people in February and March they had transitioned because of COVID, or when some of these black bars shutter, they don't have like a going away party. They just don't reopen, and it's an odd feeling of not being able to say goodbye even to a space, let alone to a person. So I felt that, and after initial bumps in the early part of COVID, just to hit a different level of success. I felt that shift and welcomed it. And it's interesting because you're still doing the same work, or you're the same person, but more opportunities opened up. So I was very thankful of that. But within my art, so it was a lot of yeses to your question. But a shift like I felt in maybe 2015 within my artist practice, I didn't feel that, but a lot of shifts in other things.
Sounds like, as you describe it, even though you initially said no, in your conversation and response, there actually were
certain aspects, but like in 2015, I had a distinct different approach that I don't see reflected now. So other things, definitely I can agree with that, but a direct shift in my artistic practice hadn't happened.
Well, I think probably, I guess I'm going to say that the isolation, prompted for me a lot of reflection. There's a thing about COVID, and like in a way that's similar to some other aspects in life, that you could say it's unjust, that it's unfair, that it's also unavoidable. So it's kind of rude and interruptive. And so I've, kind of like basically found myself working to accept that, like other things that I feel that are unjust in life. And, a lot of my life I've spent protesting and resisting things that I didn't like in life. And, sometimes that works, a lot of times it doesn't. And I found that, with COVID, I had a fair amount of regret, about it, and that, like a lot of those other things, the challenge was to engage with life. I found a lot of times, like the question for me, or how it looked like, was to pull back or to re-engage more forcefully. And I feel like that's still very much like the issue for me. Like, am I like going into my domain and, my intimacy with my own personal life, or do I reach out and husband and work with the world. And honestly, I'm on a pendulum. I go back and forth like that. There's a period of time where I want to engage, and I spend time looking at ways that we as a people can go forward and find solutions to things. And there are other times when I feel like I need to just accept the way that things are and make my peace with it. And in that context specifically, I try to attend to making something that I love and try to share it with people. And then there's a kind of like letting go after that. So I'm not going to further elaborate. I know we have some time considerations, but
No,
there.
thank you all
Sure.
for that. That's great. Thank you so much. Thank you.
Thank you.
I tried to phrase this well, but to just make a statement before the question. When I experience a piece of art live, now, my easiest equation would be to see a painting and be emotionally moved by the artist's brush strokes versus the idea that seeing it on social media, getting an Instagram order of it, getting that blast of information. Do you see a way, any of all of you, that we can start to cultivate social media and the beauty of that idea that we can all say whatever we feel or be anonymous, terrible and wonderful parts of that? Is there any way for us as artists to connect with real emotion and actually work with social media? Because again, if I see a painting online or I see a painting in print, it's going to be different than to actually get to see those brush strokes in person. If I hear a recorded performance that I wasn't at versus a performance where I was, I won't feel that jolt or those goosebumps. So I guess, are there strengths? And we know there are weaknesses with that social media aspect of getting out there, showing it, doing that connection. Is there a way for us to talk about emotion with these?
I think that you said it as far as strengths and weaknesses. This morning I was looking at Damian Lillard, a basketball player, at Disney World with his family. I felt something. I don't know him. Love Supreme was recorded in the 60s, so I have never been afforded the opportunity to hear John Coltrane play it. But I feel something every time I hear it, and that's an older recording. But there are things that you just scroll by. It's like reading audio books or reading the newspaper or the tactile feeling of having it. Now, for some people, I was talking to my best friend the other day. He's never been a reader, and with the advent of audiobooks, he said he's up to like 50 books this year. So, not to belabor it, we're just going to have strengths and weaknesses. Anytime you experience something in person, particularly as it pertains to art, it will be a different experience to really get up on something and see it. But we're not always afforded that opportunity, so it's good to expose people who can't go and see it and touch it.
Could you get to the heart of the question for me, Ben? I'm sorry, I'm a little hard of hearing, so.
Sure. I guess she's trying to say, like, it's a hugely existential question. Well, all of these are. I feel like we're all building a vocabulary for what's happening to us, and so I think that your self-doubt is a positive thing, and there isn't a vocabulary to appropriately discuss perhaps the things that we're trying to discuss tonight. She's asking about, in terms of social media, like, what the strengths and weaknesses are, and if one outweighs the other, perhaps.
Critical question. Yeah. I think that it is a very destructive development, frankly. I think that it had huge potential. It looked like it did. And I think there are positives, but it's like it has really been very destructive, I think, and turned incredibly negative for about the last 10 years. And I think it's a huge problem worldwide, not just here. And that it's time to engage with that. It really is. It's a wonderful notion that people can express themselves. But when you look at it on balance, the anonymity that it allows, it has created an incredibly negative, bile-filled space that has a truly destructive effect on personal expression and on people personally. So it's devolved into an arena where the aggression is kind of like the norm, and the most aggressive are the most effective. So, you balance that against the capability of sharing artwork on social media, if you will. And I think there are aspects that are very positive. It's great. But then there are some very negative ones that we're going to have to deal with, So it's a long conversation, but I think there are some very specific recommendations out there, and that because of the corrosive effect on the society, the divisive effect on the society, the devolution of the democratic space, we really need to address it. It should be like at the top of the list of things to address. One of them, and I could name 3 or 4 more, but I know my moderator doesn't want me to go there.
Only because of time, that's
Okay.
all. There will be time for robust interpersonal conversation after this, but I think that we should celebrate tonight with music, and leave it at that. So thank you very much.
Thank y'all.
And so don't leave, because Celine and Boris are going to perform. It's going to be lovely. We're listening to their warm up.
The headlines drip with horror. Beware, beware, beware. The news says no tomorrow, but how can I be scared? In his arms, word to your words. He and I have closed our eyes and lifted every curve. We wait in cave-in concrete military light. Is merely rain against the glass. It all for lovers in the night.
did brought a book with me, and I feel like we kind of have the time to get into it. This book is called The Mysticism of Sound and Music by Azrat Inayat Khan. And there's so many incredible teaching in this book that I just couldn't wait to talk about it tonight. Yeah. When a person learns music, he needs not necessarily learn to be a musician or to become a source of pleasure and joy to his fellow man. No. By playing, loving, and hearing music, he should develop music in his personality. The true use of music is to become musical, and one's thoughts, words, and actions. One should be able to give the harmony for which the soul yearns and longs every moment. All the tragedy in the world, in the individual and in the multitude, comes from lack of harmony. And harmony is best given by producing it in one's own life. All the tragedy in the world, in the individual and in the multitude, comes from lack of harmony. And harmony is best given by producing it in one's own life.
Ewo kale wo le wo a ale Aleo, Kakurio, Kayasirio, Ileo, Mevurio, Casio.
Thank you, everyone. Boris Ranadelaide on belly drum from Martinique. Thank you for having us.
Célène Saint-Aimé.
Please help yourself to refreshments, and James's exhibition will be open as well down on the second floor.